justice. Let's start with an understanding that the growth of the penal system in the United States is not random, right? So the vast majority of the people who are incarcerated are between the ages of 20 and 45. As far as race goes, 2/3 are African American or Hispanic. 90% of the people incarcerated or involved in the criminal justice system are male. And socioeconomic status is a big factor in whether or not you get involved in the criminal justice system and what happens to you when you are. Right? So people who are poor, unemployed, have low education levels, they're all at a gross disadvantage in our system. Right? If you are poor, you may not be able to afford a lawyer who is going to get you out of trouble. If you are unemployed, you may not be able to afford a lawyer or the fines that come with being involved in the criminal justice system. And if you have a low education level, you may not even understand that there's an option for you to hire a lawyer. You may not understand that you have the rights, the civil rights, constitutional rights that will protect you from some of these inequities of the criminal justice system, right? Well, anyway, these disparities have gotten the attention of some people, and a reaction that has really fostered a desire for some change. Some of that change is established the idea of community justice, right? Community justice is the idea that crime is a problem that impedes the quality of life. It's not just a black and white, right and wrong issue. It's a matter of finding out about how it impacts the community, the quality of life of the community, and looking for ways to solve that problem, right? Responses to crime must be more than incarceration, right? You don't just lock everybody up who commits a crime. Responses must be a collective, right? It must involve other aspects of the community besides the criminal justice system. As far as the criminal justice system goes, there are three aspects to community justice. Community policing, which I'm sure you've all heard of. Community policing is the idea of the public-private partnership where criminal justice aspects work with community leaders and other aspects of the community to try to find ways to fight crime or to collaborate to stop crime other than just arrest and incarceration, right? Environmental crime prevention it involves a lot of different things. So you want to clean up the communities, the idea of broken windows policing, an unsightly community, a disordered community leads to crime. So you clean up communities, better lighting in communities, and better resources in communities. Things other than just the court system or criminal court system, right? So in the 1960s, President Johnson had this idea of investing in communities. So poverty was centralized in the inner cities, and that was a change. Poverty used to be a rural problem, and then it moved into the inner cities. And so President Johnson had this idea, let's invest in the community centers in these different inner city neighborhoods and try to uplift the communities, make them better places to live. And so that started, and it was working out a little bit, but then the Vietnam protests started, and then the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. happened, and so there was a lot of civil unrest in the cities, and so out of sheer fear of their jobs, political leaders shifted the money that was going into the community programs and shifted them into criminal justice resources, predominantly police and prisons, and established the war on crime. That continued on through Nixon's time in office, started to roll back a little bit under Carter, but then into the Reagan administration it became the war on drugs, right? And then the idea of restorative justice, which is the idea that essentially do more than just lock people up. Now, each of these things requires greater resources, right? And it requires an attention to the idea of individualized justice, which we've talked about in law enforcement and policing, right? The idea that justice shouldn't be a cookie cutter thing, right? It shouldn't just be you commit a crime, you're this age, you have this many priors, so you go to jail for this amount of time. That we try to figure out what is the idea, and we've talked about this in other eras, right? In the 1870s, there was this idea of, hey, let's try to assess each offender and find out exactly what type of person they are and tailor their correctional state to that problem, right? So this is the idea of a greater expanded version of individualized justice where each person who commits a crime, each person who gets introduced to the criminal justice system is assessed, and we tailor a program to them to figure out what they did, why they did it, and try to help them stop. So neighborhoods, right? So each neighborhood has different problems, right, and needs different solutions to those problems. And so community justice should tailor their response to the neighborhood's problems. Use problem-solving principles, right? Identify the underlying problems that led to crime and change that rather than just try to punish all the offenders. Restoration, once again, of restorative justice. In the restoration of not just the victim, but of the offender. There are certain aspects of an offender's life that led them to crime, and restoration is the idea is that we have to fix those too, or we're just going to have this person just keep committing crimes. Justice reinvestment, use resources to improve the community, not just punish individuals, right? So the money that we usually just spend on the criminal justice system, let's use that to improve the community and have less crime happen. Arguments for community justice is crime is a localized problem and requires localized solutions. Crime fighting damages quality of life. So that's the idea that when you arrest somebody and you take them out off the street for whatever the offense, you're taking somebody away from their family. You are stopping that person's development as a human being. So when they come out, they're estranged from their family and they are no better than they were when they left. And so they're kind of forced to commit crime. And all the people that are left behind, their life gets harder. Proactive strategies are needed. That's the idea that, of the justice reinvestment, the restoration, the problem solving. Proactive strategies, try to stop the crime from happening, right? Not reactive, punish them for their crime, but proactive. Figure out ways to stop them from offending in the first place. Arguments against community justice is that impingement on individual rights. And so that's this, right? So if you've got a justice system that says you commit the crime of robbery and you're 25 years old and you've committed that robbery before, then you go to jail for 10 to 20 years, right? And so there's no flexibility there, right? That's determinate sentencing. There's no flexibility to decide what the punishment is, right? So So that is unfair. That what opponents to community justice say, that's unfair, right? I mean, that is fair. I'm sorry, that is fair. You want that to be the same for everybody. You don't want somebody or a group of people saying, hey, you know what? You did the same crimes, but you're not going to do the same time. The arguments against say that that's not fair. You want everybody to be punished the same way if you really want justice. And then there's a social inequity by punishing people differently. Right? Essentially, it's not fair. But as you can see, it's already not fair, right? So that's so arguments against. The arguments for are saying, hey, you're saying it's going to be unfair, but it's already unfair. So let's try it and see if it's unfair. And then other opponents say it's going to be more expensive. Well, we currently spend $100 billion per year on the criminal justice system. $100 billion per year. It's believed to be around $80 billion just on incarceration alone. Community justice will add an unknown amount to that, right? Or will it? But community justice is very popular, but there's not a great deal of evidence that says that it's going to work. But you know what? A lot of the times it's popular because people just want change, right? They just want something different. We're spending $100 billion and it's not working. We've got mass incarceration. Let's just try something different. That's another argument for, right? And in fact, it may be cheaper because the most expensive aspect of the criminal justice system, about the correction system and the criminal justice system is incarceration, which it costs anywhere between $50,000 and $100,000 depending on what study you're looking at, right? So to incarcerate somebody, it must be cheaper, even if it costs you $1,000 a month to monitor somebody in the home with an ankle bracelet. That's only $12,000 a year. That's significantly less no matter what study you're looking at. So if community justice involves putting an ankle bracelet on somebody at its most severe point, it still will end up being cheaper than incarceration. And so that's the last argument for it. But we're going to talk more about restorative justice next week. That's your introduction to community justice.